Homer the Smithers vs. Mountain of Madness. It's the Homer Burns Smithers Battle Royale. They're both hilarious and, dare I say, underrated gems of the classic era. But what we really want to know is, which is the better episode? Oh, I've been looking forward to this showdown for a while. These are two great episodes that feature a fun little Homer, Burns, and Smithers love triangle. Okay, maybe not a real love triangle per se, but they're both about Mr. Burns pushing Smithers aside for a new person to hang out with. And they both certainly lead to some fireworks. So let's get right down to it. This is the case for Homer the Smithers. Homer the Smithers is a very simple episode in a lot of ways. I have to warn you in advance, this argument is going to contain the words character and relationship a lot, because Homer the Smithers is a very character-driven and relationship-driven episode. And the easiest example of this would be to look at the jokes. The first reason why Homer the Smithers is superior is because the jokes are more character-driven. I mean, just look at them. Pretty much every joke comes from the unique personality quirks of the characters. Stuff like Burns freaking out about Lenny's drunken friendliness, Smithers' over-the-top depression over failing his boss, Mr. Burns not wanting to talk to his mother, or basically every single moment where Homer tries to serve as Mr. Burns' assistant. There are definitely quote-unquote wacky, absurd, and observational jokes in there, but where Homer the Smithers shines is the witty back and forth between characters. They don't quite know how to deal with each other, so when backed into a corner, they do a lot of silly things, and when trying to fix their problems, they do even more silly things. Homer doing an imitation of Burns' mother is only funny because it's Homer doing it. Burns teaching himself to make coffee and drive a car is only funny because it's Mr. Burns. Homer the Smithers is the master of playing characters against each other to produce hilarious results. That leads me perfectly into my next point. Homer the Smithers is the superior episode because it has better conflict. Now sure, the other episode definitely has a share of conflict. It ends in a bitter struggle in their underwear after all. But a lot of that episode is just Homer and Burns chilling out, while Smithers is annoyed and bitter miles and miles away. Homer the Smithers is a little more consistent with its conflict, constantly driving the story forward and examining the Homer and Burns relationship in a more interesting and nuanced way. These scenes are fun because Mr. Burns is most fun when wielding power recklessly. We can sympathize with Homer, but also laugh at his situation. When Homer does finally have enough, it is a genuinely amazing and mystifying moment. I can't underemphasize how huge this moment is. After 6 seasons of abuse, Homer has finally punched Mr. Burns in the face. There are a lot of ways they could have played this situation, but the one they went with is really interesting. Burns doesn't pick himself up and fire Homer, he goes into a corner and cowers in fear. Kinda surprising given the character, but foreshadowed earlier in the episode. Burns is the kind of person who has never really been stood up to, especially not physically, so the general shock to his system makes sense. As he tries to pick himself up and learn to do things for himself, you kinda start rooting for him in a weird way. In the end, Homer the Smithers teaches us that assault and battery is a good thing. Okay, not exactly, but it demonstrates how Homer the Smithers uses this conflict to bring out new situations and character moments for people we already know. These situations are ultimately the final reason why Homer the Smithers is better. In the end, it's just a more relatable episode. I think everyone can relate to having a boss with unrealistic demands, or having to put in huge sacrifices to keep them happy. I think everyone can relate to being a scared little kid who doesn't know what to do. We've all felt like Smithers sometimes, anxious about disappointing the people we love, as well as worrying about not being needed anymore. It's a very, very down-to-earth episode, focused on the relationships of 3 very different people. These relationships are ultimately what makes Homer the Smithers the superior episode. It drives the jokes, the story, and the character progression. But of course, that's just one way you can look at it. Now let's all put on our ski caps and corpse handling gloves and take a look at Mountain of Madness. When you first think of an episode like Mountain of Madness, you usually think of some of the wackier moments in it. Stuff like the avalanches, the Homer and Burns battle, the parking lot joke, the Smokey the Bear parody. And while it does have a greater share of crazy stuff that happens in it, at least compared to the other episode, to pigeonhole it as a one-trick pony is simply unfair. Because the first reason why Mountain of Madness is superior is because it has a better variety of jokes. The other episode hasn't cornered the market on character-driven stuff, you know. Mountain of Madness is full of it too. Just Homer and Mr. Burns hanging out together, bonding over the merits of cheating, as well as having a good sit. And even though they aren't at odds yet, they're still a hilarious duo. As they slowly begin to go crazy, their dynamic is even more funny. And what Mountain of Madness does is throw in that extra wacky Simpsons humor to complete the package. Sure, let's have a snowman battle. Let's throw in Abe Lincoln. And a rocket house? Sure, why not? It's just a better mix of jokes overall. You want mundane humor? Here comes the park ranger. You want Lenny and Carl jokes? Oh, we've got Lenny and Carl jokes. You want screw the audience jokes? Well, screw you. There's a little bit of something for everybody here, keeping things fresh and interesting at all times. The variety of jokes is closely linked to the next main point. Mountain of Madness is better because it has a better character balance. The other episode is basically just Homer, Mr. Burns, and Smithers, and that's it. The rest of the family can barely even get in the episode. Mountain of Madness uses its secondary characters to its advantage, like pairing Smithers with Bart and Lisa, for example, or bringing in Marge to chase after the plot, or just having Lenny and Carl do Lenny and Carl things. This isn't really to the detriment of the Homer and Burns stuff because we obviously still get a lot of that. We get a sort of everyman version of Burns, at least by his standards. He's still slightly out of touch, but he can at least relate to Homer at a core personal level. Mountain of Madness manages to paint this picture of Homer and Burns without shortchanging the rest of the cast. With all the avalanches, it would be really easy for Act 3 to become really claustrophobic. And while they do manage to capture the tension between Homer and Burns, the outside characters do a great job of framing the situation and building the stakes. The other episode takes a very narrow focus, taking an intensive look at the major players. But I feel The Simpsons is at its best when using its full cast to its advantage. Mountain of Madness is a very open episode, letting people pop in to do what they do best. And this might sound silly as a final point of comparison, but Mountain of Madness is just plain more fun and adventurous than the other one. It's not content to just sit around in the offices the whole time. We've got a whole mountain to explore. It's an episode about putting characters in extreme situations and finding out what they would do. The other episode is just Homer and Burns sniping at each other. We've gotten this kind of dynamic in countless episodes before. This is just the status quo in a slightly different situation. Let's put them in a real life or death situation and see if they can get out of it. Let's really back them into a corner and see who goes crazy first. Let's see which of them can make the better snowman. Sure, the conclusion is more wacky and unrealistic, but it's more fun than the other episode. Throwing Burns out the window is also unrealistic, you know. Give me the rocket house any day of the week. The two episodes are the very definition of an indoor episode versus an outdoor episode. Yeah, we've still got the Springfield nuclear power plant workers, we're just taking them to a more fun location. How can that be a bad thing? And that's basically it. It's hard to really go on any longer when you've declared one episode more fun. So with that being said, let's go to the verdict. Alright, so you've heard the arguments for the two different episodes, so let's finish this thing off and pick something. This is normally where I throw in a few nitpicks for both of them, but honestly, I can't really think of much to criticize, at least from a structural level. I mean, sure, both episodes have a few snoozers among their jokes, but they're both such funny episodes as a whole, there isn't really much to complain about. For me, it kinda comes down to the way the episodes structure their Homer, Burns, and Smithers interactions. Like, for example, look at the way they handle Homer and Burns together. Do we like the two characters at odds with each other and then eventually reconciling? Or do we like them getting along, having a good time, and then turning on each other? Both approaches definitely have their advantages. Homer the Smithers is a little faster paced, a little snappier, and definitely more explosive with its conflict. Mountain of Madness is a slower burn by comparison, but it reaches greater heights overall. Their slower moments of bonding makes their paranoid betrayals more captivating. It's a legitimately tough choice. But as is the nature of the game, I have to choose one. So, if I had to choose only one of these episodes, I think I would go with Homer the Smithers. It pains me not to pick Mountain of Madness, because it means picking against the Smokey the Bear joke, which is like a top 10 joke of all time. But where I come down to it is that Homer the Smithers is a slightly more consistent and dynamic episode than Mountain of Madness. I do think Mountain of Madness hits higher highs overall, both in terms of humor and action, but there really are a lot of slow moments in it. I like the Homer and Burns interaction in theory, but when paired with Marge and the park ranger jokes about boredom and lameness, and the whole thing drags just a little. Homer the Smithers has the advantage in that Smithers is just around more for more of the action. He really mixes well with the Homer and Burns dynamic, and Mountain of Madness misses out on a little of that. His stuff with Bart and Lisa is really fun and memorable, but I like him more in the other episode, where he takes a more active role. The Homer and Burns dynamic affects the Burns and Smithers dynamic. The Burns and Smithers dynamic affects the Homer and Smithers dynamic. And the Homer and Smithers dynamic affects the Burns and Smithers dynamic in the end. Round and around and around the loop we go. Homer the Smithers feels a little more focused in the story it wants to tell, whereas Mountain of Madness pushes the story in a lot of different crazy directions. But man, some of the jokes are so good in that episode. I wish I could cheat like Mr. Burns and let both episodes win. Hey, maybe there is no winner. Maybe it's just one of those metaphorical things, like the winner is the joy we get in our hearts from these episodes. No, I said there would be a winner, and the internet wouldn't allow a tie to happen. So do you think I made the right decision, or should I take another look? Let me know in the comments. But for now, this case is closed.